Before we begin today, I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. The title partner Z, in association with Rajnigandha Silver Pearls, powered by Airtel. Our venue partners, Google, Ford, Mahindra Humanities Center, Aga Khan Foundation, Dettol, Amity University, Dove, Rajasthan Tourism, British Council, The Getty, Glenlivet, Amway, Kotak Mahindra, EU Financiers, NH Health, Jan Mikulski, Coca-Cola, YPO, WPO, Kingfisher, Diggy Palace Hotel, Rambagh Palace, Le Méridien, Clark's Amer Hotel, State Bank of Bikaner and Jaipur, Indigo, Uber, Penguin Random House, and Nestle. I would also like to thank our media partners, Patrika Group, Red FM, Dainik Bhaskar, DNA, and Twitter. Before we start, I would also request you to keep the aisles clean for easier movement. Please do not leave your bags unattended at the festival. We are unable to take any responsibility for loss. Please ensure your phones are placed in silent mode, and if you must take an urgent call, to do so outside the venue. We would be grateful if you give up seats for those who may not be able to stand. No flash photography is needed or permitted in this venue. Please tweet using hashtag ZJLF or tag ZJaipurLitFest. You will be provided more information about the goodies you can win from this at the information desk. Ladies and gentlemen, we are delighted to introduce Scenes from a Writer's Life, sponsored by Dainik Bhaskar. Please welcome Ruskin Bond, who will be in conversation Ruskin Bond in conversation with Ravi Singh. He will be introduced by Vikas Singh. Vikas Singh is Associate Vice President, Brand Marketing with India's largest newspaper group and world's fourth largest newspaper, Dainik Bhaskar. A much awarded marketer, he has been a lifelong fan of Ruskin Bond. He first read him in class 7, and the story was The Night Train at Deoli. That began a love affair with writings of India's most celebrated author. He holds a Limca record for the largest collection of books by any single author. He has a collection of more than 150 books. He also manages a Facebook page on Ruskin Bond. He has also been writing regularly on his favorite author. He is currently working on a book called Travel Diaries with Ruskin Bond. Please welcome our speakers for today.
So we'll be releasing a special edition today. That's what he was saying, that it will be a good reference.
No. Where are you staying, Ravi? Where are you staying?
They can hear us.
Acha, okay. So we have to be. have to be careful what I say now.
You can hear the sound? Start. Amidst all the media frenzy surrounding, the new Anglo-Indian writers like Salman Rushdie, Arundhati Roy, Vikram Seth, Amitabh Ghosh, stands apart Ruskin Bond, the gentle dreamer from Garhwal Hills. His writings have always reflected the very smells and sounds of this country. His writings have been a reflection of his Indian soul. Eccentric and sometimes even murderous uncles, granny, grandpa, mischievous school children have delightfully seeped into his stories, which are often laced with nostalgia, longings, and unfinished episodes of romance. Despite having lived in Mussoorie for a long part of his life and later in Landore, he has not left or allowed his imagination to rot. There is something strange, a magnetic attraction about Mussoorie, because it has managed to attract so many writers. Other than Dublin, this is the only place on this planet with such a high density of authors. Whether it is Bill Atkin or Ganesh Shaili or Stephen Alter or the gangsters or even Ruskin Bond, the list is endless. But it's only this author who has brought alive the smells of the hills in his writings. Like R.K. Narayan brought alive Malgudi to the hearts of thousands of his fans, Ruskin has done the same with Dehradun, or shall I say Dehra. I was myself heavily disappointed when I walked out of Dehradun railway station on a hot, sultry afternoon of June 1989, because the city was very different from the city he had painted in his writings. But alas, the times had changed. Ruskin Bond's writings have warmed hearts of generations of readers. First the parents and their children later have found solace, pleasure, and even companionship in his books. The long serpentine queue outside the Cambridge bookstore on the Mussoorie Mall Road is a testimony to his popularity. Yesterday, Penguin brought out a special 60th year anniversary issue of his first novel, The Room on the Roof. He was already a published author before he published his first novel. So for the last 60-65 years, he has been creating magic with his pen. He never had a writer's block, and thank God for that. And we do hope that he continues to create magic with his pen. In an interview to Indian Express in June 1998, he said, "I still write in longhand. I recently bought for myself a mobile phone, and while trying to get a proper network, I dropped it down the window. I pretty much could have fallen down the window myself." That, ladies and gentlemen, is Ruskin Bond for all of us. A witty, cheerful author with always a smile on his face and a mischievous prank in his eyes, with, like you can see right now also, with his hair neatly combed like a schoolboy.
Had a haircut just before coming, actually.
In conversation with him today will be Ravi Singh. Now, Ravi has worked at both ends of the spectrum. He has worked with the largest publishing firm in the country, Penguin, and with a boutique publishing firm, Alf, before he decided to branch out on his own with the Speaking Tiger. Ravi has been publishing regularly Ruskin Bond, and we do hope, Ravi, that you continue to do so.
Oh, of course, yeah.
We all are eagerly waiting for your publication of Ruskin Bond's autobiography later this year. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give to you India's most loved, most adored, most talked about, most written about author, Ruskin Bond, in conversation with Ravi Singh.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Well, I can't make love to all of you at the same time, but I would love to actually. But I can feel the affection and warmth emanating from you and coming towards me. It's great to be with you. I'm really moved and touched. Thank you.
It's phenomenal each time we watch Mr. Bond addressing people. I just look at the number of people. So there's hope for books. There'll always be hope for books. When people keep telling you that booksellers, readers, etc., that things are bad, they're not bad. Here's proof that things are great. I thought, Mr. Bond, are we playing the AV now or later? Because
No, I think they've already played the AV.
okay, good, okay. I thought I'd ask you something that Vikas told me about, that he discovered your first published story, My Calling.
Yes.
So was that the first story you wrote, or was it The Untouchable? Because
No, Untouchable was the second or third.
Okay.
The first story was called My Calling, and I wrote it just after finishing school. That was 1951. So you can see how ancient I am. And it was a skit actually on one of my school teachers. And I had just finished school that year, and they weren't very happy up at my old school, I'm afraid. And they didn't send me my character and school leaving certificate because I had poked fun at one of my teachers. And I'm still waiting for it. Now, how many years have gone? 65 years. Maybe I send a reminder now to my old school. Can I have my school leaving certificate? But it shows that even if you're thrown out of school, it shouldn't stop you from doing something useful in life. And
but and I've always believed that one of the reasons why, as Vikas said, of course, generations, people old and young have read you and enjoyed, but children love you more. And I believe it's also because you encourage them to mischief. I remember where you, in a story where it said, where you talk about running away from school, and you recommend it as something that more people should have done. Boring people should have run away from school, would have made them more interesting. But just tell us about the time that you did run away from school.
No, if you're going to run away from school, make sure you have enough pocket money with you. Because the time I ran away from school, I neglected that. And so the very next day, when I felt very hungry, I came limping back in time for lunch. So these things have to be planned out well in advance. And but my honest advice to you is, don't run away from school. Make your teachers run away from school.
There's more. You also you have characters, talking of teachers. A little girl who turns into a panther to get rid of a teacher she doesn't like. You have this young boy who spikes his, really annoying uncle's food or drink is it with arsenic. And children love those kind of stories. So it's a bit disappointing that you're asking them not to run away from school. But never mind.
No, but there are various ways of dealing with teachers, of course.
Yeah.
But the best way to deal with them is love your teacher, and teacher will love you then. They don't like that advice at all.
See? No, so I did want to come back to The Untouchable. You wrote that when you were 16, I think, right?
Which one?
Untouchable.
17, 18.
17, 18.
Yeah, right.
And was that because many of the stories you've said, in a sense autobiographical, and that I found that is a very moving story. And at that young age,
yes.
the empathy that you'd had, was that based on
Yes.
real life incident?
It was to some extent. A lot of my stories, particularly the early ones, were based on actual experience or upon characters or people I'd met and known. But being an imaginative fiction writer, I often then weave the actuality into a fictional narrative to create an interesting story. So you'll find a lot of my stories and work are really a mixture of fact and fiction, because in order to tell a good story, sometimes you have to manipulate in a way the characters, the facts, bring in new people, leave out some. So this is all just part of the learning process, which continues no matter how old you are. You can always be a better writer. And I'm always trying to be a better writer.
I think the characters like The Untouchable, and then later in The Room of Many Colors, you had this Maharani locked away. There was another one, Most Beautiful, about this this young boy who's who's a difficult childhood. And many of the characters that you write about, even adults, not just children, are in a sense, you know, what we call rejected, neglected, lonely by choice or circumstance.
Yes.
And what was it that, you know, drew you to people like that? Was it the circumstances of your own childhood?
Yes, I think if you have a lonely childhood and a difficult one, it will probably make you more sensitive to the problems of other children, especially when you've grown up. So I have often written stories about disadvantaged or children or those who are having difficult times because I see something of myself in them, and so the empathy and the sympathy goes out to them. So I think that, and I think many well-known and famous writers have had difficult childhoods. I think you can think of Charles Dickens for one, or the Bronte sisters, or many authors of classics, because I think that in a way, when they're older, it helps them to depict honestly and truthfully the world of childhood and the problems that you have as young people.
Was it, I mean, because you have written about one of the reasons why your childhood was, in a sense, difficult, lonely, which isn't to say that, you know, you were always lonely. It had its rewards, of course. But one of the reasons was your parents' separation. But was the fact that you were of, you know, British descent, did that set you apart from the society that you were in? Was that also something that contributed to the loneliness, or, you know, this sense of being apart when you were here?
Yes, to some extent. I think certainly if I always, even today, I get very disturbed and upset if I see a married couple, adults who got children, if I see the parents quarreling, it bothers me because I feel it's going to have in some way an effect on the children. So I do think that parents must always put their children first before they venture out on their own trying to solve their own problems. First look to your children.
Right. And together with that, I mean, what having written about your parents' relationship, you have written about your father quite a lot, and you know, what I find remarkable is that in your writings he comes across as somebody who was actually a friend. You forget almost that he was a father. There was you know, what must have been about 30 or more years separating you. He was like a companion, and there's such tenderness in So was he, in a sense, your first friend?
Yes, he was, indeed, because I must have been 8 years old, and we were living in Delhi, and he would often take me around to old monuments, Humayun's tomb, the Red Fort, Chandni Chowk, and tell me the stories, the history behind these places. So in a way, that was the genesis of my becoming a writer. And sadly, I lost him when I was only 9 or 10, but that relationship is still with me. So some things don't go away, no matter how many years pass. If the bond is a strong one, it remains with you all your life.
He was in the RAF, wasn't he?
Yes, that time during it was World War II. Right.
World War II. And your mother, of course, with whom, you know, I mean, after a long time,
yes.
so one of your most moving stories is about meeting her for the last time. But the inspiration that you had from your father, the strength that he gave you, and then, of course, reading, he encouraged you, and you say that that's a habit that you know, you owe to him. But in your writing, in your character, in your general outlook to life, and I may be mistaken, but the optimism, the spirit, and I suppose a certain quality of, you know, a kind of sensuality in the loving life, being able to connect with people,
Yes.
spirit of adventure. I somehow feel that's something that you inherited from your mother, her spirit. And,
That's
you know,
true. I think it took me many years to perhaps understand and see my mother's point of view better. And that happened only as I grew older. But this is supposed to be a funny session where
We will
be
make it.
also serious.
but I think it's important for people to know that, you know, behind all of this,
Yes, true enough.
there are things that drove you to writing, and also which made you seek friends, because in your writing and also in your life.
That's true. I
is
was
you've
always
made
looking,
friends
as a young man,
easily, yeah.
sort of looking for the ideal friend.
Yeah.
And it's only when you get older that you realize that you mustn't look for perfection in your friends. You must look for affection. And that's the important thing.
And you managed to keep most of those relationships, the friendships going, even after what, 50 years, 60 years or longer?
Yes, some true enough, yes. Somi, who's in the room on the roof, after 50 years, he'd been living abroad all this time.
Right.
And about a month or two back, he turned up and met me, and he'd be just a few years younger than me, but he was just as young and charming and affectionate as ever.
What does he do now then? He's in the UK, is he, or is he?
Yeah,
is he
in America.
And what does he do?
Oh, he's an engineer.
Many of your friends have done very well for themselves. These childhood friends.
Yeah. Well, most of them did well. One did end up in Tihar jail, but he's doing well there too.
Who is this?
No, I can't tell you.
Okay.
I must keep the identity secret so that when he comes out, we can rehabilitate him.
And from friendship, let's move on to love. And you said often that you had this habit of falling in love very often.
Yes.
And
far too easily.
And you continue to fall in love still.
Unfortunately, I don't get the love back as easily.
Really? That's a lot of love. Look at this.
Yes, I do get back a lot of it. That's true.
Right. It's talking of love, and again you'll say it's supposed to be funny, and I'm sorry, I'm making it a little serious. In the context of love, there's this line which has stayed with me in one of your stories. It's remarkable, where you said, I fell in love with someone fell in love with me, and both loves were unrequited, but life carried on. And so how was that? Would you like to talk about some of these? I mean, even without naming them, who may have changed you in a way, and contributed to your life.
I'm feeling very shy now.
About the girl from Vietnam, the story when you started in the UK.
I'm trying to remember.
Whom should you honor?
The first time I tried to kiss a girl and she tried to kiss me and we missed each other.
Where was this?
I was very small then.
And was she older?
No, about the same.
Okay. Okay. Because in the room on the roof, handful of nuts.
10 years old. 10 years old.
She was 10 years old.
And so was I.
Oh, so okay. And is she still around?
Well, if she's around, she'd be 81.
And she'd remember you, I'm sure.
She'd remember me missing the kiss.
Tell us a bit, Mr. Bond, about your decision finally, when you did go to the UK, and you worked there for a couple of years, and that is where your first book was published.
That's true, yes.
And it was Diana Athill, the
One of
legendary
the
editor
editors
who selected your book and
Yeah.
worked closely with you, and it was published there. But then you decided, just when your book had been accepted, it was going to be published, and you decided to come back to India.
Yeah.
And then you've never left India, in a sense.
Yes.
Why was that?
You see, when I finished school, 1950-51, and I came home, and my mother asked me, now, what do you want to do with yourself, Ruskin? And I said, Mama, I think I'm going to be a writer. She said, don't be silly, go and join the army. In those days, the army was where most boys went, because you didn't have the very wide selection of careers that you have today. And anyway, I did. If I joined the army, there'd have been another Beetle Bailey in the ranks. So I was shipped off to England to relatives, and I took a job there because I didn't have much money. So I've always, all my life, been ready to do any kind of work. But the minute I get a chance to go back to full-time writing, I do that. So, but while I was in Britain and living with relatives, I was very homesick. Not so much for home, but for friends, for places, for the India in which I'd grown up. And that's when I started writing this book, The Room on the Roof, which was really about the Dehradun I'd left behind and the friends I'd left behind. And I had this advantage in that last year in India, I'd kept a journal or diary. So a lot of that material got used up in writing the book, although I was now fictionalizing it, as I always do, and weaving it into a story. So it took me a couple of years to find a publisher. It wasn't easy in those days. It still isn't. And anyway, I finally did, and there was this sympathetic, helpful editor you mentioned, Diana Athill. But I got fed up of waiting for the book to be published. So in those days, you got a £50 advance. That was the standard advance back in the 1950s. But it was enough to bring me back to India. You traveled in those days by sea, and you came by, and so the fare was about £40 actually. Took you about 3 weeks. Finally got down in Bombay and still had £10 with me. So came home to Dehradun, and I had an old typewriter, and so I just immediately started banging out stories, articles, and bombarding every magazine and newspaper in the country, in our country. And then The Room on the Roof got published in England, and a few copies turned up in Dehradun, and 2 or 3 friends I had, we went out and celebrated. Now in those days, there were no literary festivals, there were no book fairs, there were no book launches. If you wrote a book, you were lucky to get it published, and if you went to a bookshop, you'd be very lucky to see it there. And I remember going to a bookshop in Delhi and looking around for my book like any young author would do, couldn't see it anywhere. And then I saw it right under a stack of bestsellers, I forget the bestsellers of that era, this is in the 50s. And I looked, if this bookseller was looking or not. He wasn't. So I took it out from under the pile and put it on top. So everybody could see my book. But the shop owner, the bookseller, he'd seen me doing this. So he walked across. He didn't know I was the author, of course. He walked across, picked up the book, looked at it, and he said, "Ye nahi chalta." And he put it back under the pile. So to teach him a lesson, I bought it. Sometimes authors had to buy their own books in those days.
Well, for many years now, you've been having sweet revenge. They don't put your books right on top, and the others go. But and then when you came back to Dehradun, another remarkable character from your life, whom you've also written about, BBG.
No, right.
Who was BBG was the wife of the man who of your stepfather.
Stepfather's first wife.
Yeah,
sounds very
stepfather's first wife, who shouldn't have had any reason to be kind to you and give you a lodging and keep you there.
No, that's true. She was quite fond of me, and I used to help her in her shop. She had a little provision store.
Right.
And she was a big, strong woman, not no fairy.
Yeah.
And could pick up sacks of grain and flour and throw them around.
Yeah.
And she ran this little store on her own, and I have written a bit about her, but maybe there'll be more about her in my
the
memoir.
autobiography. Yeah, there should be lots. She's quite a character.
Yes.
And then after that, some years you were there, and then you came to Delhi. You were here freelancing, and then eventually you decided to move to Mussoorie, and that has been home now for
Yes, a long time.
How many years? What, 50?
You were saying something about Mussoorie having brought about so many writers going there. But I don't think it's the place that makes a writer. I was a writer long before I went to live in the hills. If you're a writer, you can be a great writer living in Jaipur, you can be a great writer living in the far south or in a village for that matter. Premchand lived in a village most of his life. So you don't, I don't think it's the place. The place is helpful. I mean, obviously, if you're happy in a certain environment, as I am in the hills and close to nature, it will help you in your writing. But being a writing is something that's born in you. So it doesn't matter where you are. You can be living in a hut. You can do your writing in a train or even in difficult circumstances. In a prison, many great books have been written in prisons. Victor Hugo and others. So the place is helpful. It's important, but it doesn't make you the writer that you are.
But you chose it because, what is it about Mussoorie? Why did you, I mean, you said, of course, one practical reason it was close to
I
Delhi.
knew the area. No,
Right.
for purely practical reasons, I went up to
Right.
the hills
Right.
and chose Mussoorie because A, I knew the area, having grown up in the Doon Valley. B, although I was fed up of living in Delhi, I still wanted to be in touch with publishers and editors and all who were in Delhi, and it was close. In 7 or 8 hours, you could come down in a bus.
Right.
It takes a little longer now because the traffic is heavier, but now there are other ways of getting there. So that was another reason. And basically it was very, very cheap for a struggling writer in those days to go and live in a hill station. It isn't anymore, but back in the 50s, 60s, I rented a small cottage near the forest for an annual rent of 500 rupees per annum, not per month, per annum. So that's cottage today, they will be charging a rent of about 50,000 rupees a month. So you see how, what's it called, inflation, or the world has changed.
It's terrible times.
And so I have to write harder to get books published and to make enough money to live on. So it's a vicious circle, as you'll find now as you grow up trying to make a living. The more you earn, you'll find the more you have to spend.
But you did through the years. I mean, you freelanced, and after you moved to Mussoorie,
Yes.
you worked briefly for imprint, but that was it. After that, it's only been writing.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
No, and even that magazine editing, I did it from there.
From there, you
From
didn't.
there.
Yeah, you didn't move to, where was the office was in Bombay, I think.
Yes.
But you didn't move to, and then you worked with Care.
No, that was in Delhi.
That was in Delhi.
was in
Yeah.
Delhi,
But apart from that, it has been writing, even though it
Then
was
in-
very
in-
difficult, wasn't it?
In Jersey, in the Channel Islands, I worked briefly with a travel agency, Thomas Cook and Sons.
Ah.
And they'd opened but they'd send a representative out from London to Jersey in the Channel Islands to run a small office there because a lot of tourists would come there. And this lady needed an assistant. So she took me on. I was only 16, 17 years old, not totally inexperienced. And then she started having a love affair with a gentleman who sold fire extinguishers, second-hand fire extinguishers. He'd paint them up and resell them, and leave me in charge of the office. And I would, sitting there with the telephone, getting calls from London, asking me to book people into hotels. And till today, I still get confused between twin beds and double beds. So the call would come, so-and-so, they want twin beds, somebody want double beds, and I was getting all mixed up. So people who wanted to sleep in the same bed, I was separating them and putting them in double beds. And people who were used to all their lives to living in separate beds, they were being put in the same bed. So there was a lot of confusion. And I got fired, of course. The lady got fired. I don't know if she ever married the fire extinguisher or not.
The fire extinguisher.
But so the office closed down after 3 months. So if anybody here wants to start a travel agency, I'm very experienced. You can employ me.
I thought since there are so many people here, and they, many of them, perhaps all of them, would like to ask you questions. So the next 15 minutes or so.
Oh, yes, please ask me.
And we won't be able to take all questions, but we'll try. Yes, you raise your hand first. Yes, sir. Yeah.
where is that person?
So you lived a little in Mussoorie, and I'm also from that place, Mussoorie and Dehradun.
Where is he?
How much do you think Dehradun and Mussoorie have changed? Do you think these places have lost their charm?
All our towns have changed quite dramatically over the years. Dehradun in particular, in those years it was a small town, population about 40 to 50,000. And today that population is over 10 lakhs. So you can just imagine the effect it would have on the growth and the development or lack of development of the town. Hill stations have changed in a certain way. The hills can't change, of course, but the towns sometimes do. But I would say it's more our towns and cities that maybe have changed more dramatically over the years.
You and then you, sir. Just can you give the mic here, please?
Where is the speaker?
Oh, I didn't see you. Yes. Yeah.
सर दिस
Yeah.
इज जयप्रकाश में से बहुत बड़ा फैन हूँ सर आपका
Yes.
और बहुत सारी बुक्स आपकी सारी बुक्स पढ़ी है मैंने ऑलमोस्ट जो थोड़ी सस्ती है मतलब महंगी वाली नहीं पढ़ी है और मतलब मैं सर आपके अपने एग्जाम्स में भी मैंने आपकी बुक्स पढ़ी हैं एंटी डिप्रेसेंट के लिए और सर मैं पता नहीं सर मैं डेलीगेट बनना चाहता था यहाँ पे पैसे ही नहीं है मेरे पास स्टूडेंट हूँ लेकिन सर मैं आपके साथ थोड़ा टाइम स्पेंड करना चाहता हूँ आप मेरे साथ लंच कर लीजिए आप आइसक्रीम खाना चाहें आइसक्रीम खा लीजिए आप सर प्लीज़ 5 मिनट्स 10 मिनट्स जो भी मेरे को देंगे दे दीजिए आई विल नॉट बी अ बोरिंग पर्सन प्लीज़ सर प्लीज़ सर
He wants to give me lunch.
He wants to give you lunch. He said if you want ice cream, he'll feed you ice cream. Just 5 minutes.
I have a lot of people with me. You'll have to give them lunch too.
Yeah.
We'll meet after.
Sir, there's this little girl we have to get.
Hello, myself Saloni Sharma. I'm from Bannerjee School. I'm 11 years old. I can't believe that I'm talking to you. I have a question that which of your the best book you should suggest me to read that will help me in my career.
How old are you? How old are you?
11.
11.
A book that you should read a book called Little Women. You'll enjoy that and it'll help you too. It's not by me, Little Women. Little Women. Yes, you
My
get
God,
it?
yeah, it is. Yes. One of your
my
books.
book.
Yeah.
To help, but my book won't help you in your career.
Only that inspires.
Read the Blue Umbrella then.
Blue Umbrella.
Blue Umbrella.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Excuse me. There's the gentleman there. Yeah. We'll come back to you, ma'am. Just one question and then we'll, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Well,
I'm Dr. Kailash Gupta. I'm Managing Trustee of the International Emergency Management Society, and I'm also helping the organizers in disaster management evacuation. You said that, and I'm a non-fiction writer. I've got PhD, but you said that a writer is born. So my question is whether writer is born or one can learn to write fiction also.
a very interesting question. You can learn, of course, to write fiction, non-fiction. A certain type of writer is born, I would say. A writer who's very, you could say a subjective writer, who might be writing out of his own life, out of his own experience, out of his own soul, and using language in which to express himself, because basically writing is self-expression. But if you want to be a writer of history or of social affairs or a travel writer, you can, of course, learn to write. You can improve your writing. You can to work on it. So I mean, and even a born writer, if I think of myself as one, I would also endeavor to improve my writing style, my language, because no matter how well you write, you can always write better. So you must keep on working on it. But there's nothing to stop you from writing or from improving your work.
You had a question, yes. Yes, then you.
Hello. Sir, namaskar. Sir, I wanted to know about your adopted family, which you have mentioned in The Reign of the Forest.
You want me to adopt you?
No, sir, I am very much curious to know about that family.
Yes, yes.
What
Well,
happened to that?
You come to Missouri, you'll meet them.
Whole family is there?
Yes, yes.
Okay, that Prem.
That's right.
So they are grown up.
Yes, Rakesh is grown up. He's brought me here. He's with me.
Oh. So we want to see him.
You can see him. I don't know. He's very shy. He may not want you to see him.
He's there.
Okay, sir. One more
You know
question.
that.
He's there. Sir, in one of your stories, there was a pond you have written about, and one serpent came up. Do you remember that story?
A serpent came up out of a?
Out of a pond.
Yeah, something in the water. That's right.
Yeah. So, is it true?
No, that story was a bit of fantasy.
Fantasy.
Yes.
Okay, okay, sir.
Excuse me,
So
could
it
you,
was so real.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
right there in the pink t-shirt, right, yeah. I don't want to miss the young.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Where are you? Yeah, I can see you.
I am an English major student because you inspired me to be. So my question is, in one of your books, in the author's introduction, you wrote that these days it's very difficult to find a profession where you're never been seen, and that's why I like this profession. So,
Yes.
Sir,
Yes.
why is it that a man with such intriguing thoughts and great works does not want to be seen?
Well, you see, writers, when I started writing, writers were not seen. You didn't have events like this. You did not have television.
Yes.
So a writer was usually not a face. Even a famous writer would be known very often by his name or her name, but you could pass him or her in the street and you wouldn't know who that person was. So you could be anonymous as a writer, and that had a certain advantage because being anonymous, you could move amongst people and get to know them more easily because people were not it was informal. People were not approaching you because you were a writer, but you were just one of them. And so you weren't being noticed all the time. You could watch people without being watched. But I'm sitting here, you're all watching me. I can't watch each of you individually unless I know you personally. So there was a great advantage in being anonymous for a writer. It's because things have changed now. And part of the whole business of publishing and books and selling them is to get writers to come out into the marketplace and help to sell their own books. Otherwise, maybe nobody will buy them. So that's it.
This young boy here, and then we'll have to go there. Yeah, you, and right at the back, yeah?
Hello sir, my name is Raghav. I'm from New Jammu School and I'm a huge fan. So you talked about that incident where you kept your bestseller on the top. So I want to know that, was your past useful? Was your past the one that made you where you are? And what do you feel about your past? Was it necessary in your life, or was that the thing which made you who you are? Thank you.
The past, sorry,
Past.
the past.
Yeah, past.
Yes, you're right. We are all, in a way, as we grow up and as we get older, influenced and governed by the past. We can't escape it. And sometimes we allow the past to overcome us and maybe give way to depression or a sense of failure because of early difficulties. So the past is always with us and we can't escape it, but we must try to use it to the best advantage and allow our past in a way to help us, to assist us in making a better life for ourselves. Because the more problems and difficulties we have, the more we learn from them.